Tensions obviously remaining high in the Middle East after Iran's aerial attack on Israel. The Trump trial jury selection gets underway in a few hours. How does that impact his campaign? Well, we enlisted some help this morning from Monday Morning Quarterbacks to break it on down. We're joined this morning by panelists Chris Johnson and Rich Nichols. Always good to see both of you. All right, I want to start, though, with what's happening in the Middle East as obviously the situation continues to escalate, and then that puts more pressure now. You can only imagine on the U.S. Congress to put more aid out there for Israel. Rich, I'll start with you. How do you handle the situation from a political standpoint in the U.S.?
Yeah, it continues to be a tough political issue for both Democrats and Republicans because, you know, we want to support Israel as much as we possibly can. But I think Netanyahu really needs to listen to President Biden and not strike back. You know, it's clear to me, at least, that Iran basically just sent a message over the weekend. I mean, they could have done a lot more damage than they did. They sent a message. They really don't want to be involved in a bigger conflict in the Middle East, but they had to respond to Israel's unprovoked attack on their embassy in Syria. So I think Netanyahu just needs to take the win, take a step back, and let us do what we need to do to continue to support Israel in their issues with Hamas.
Obviously, as we've learned in history, I mean, it could escalate, essentially overnight, as we saw the first strikes there. Chris, what do you think? From a political standpoint, how do you handle the situation?
Yeah, the politics are going to be difficult no matter what, but I just want to take issue a little bit with what Rich said, calling this an unprovoked attack. This all started in October 7th when Hamas, who is an Iranian proxy, attacked Israel. That was an unprovoked attack. What is happening now is just the subtext of this conflict is becoming text. And that's why it's so vitally important, both politically and for foreign policy, that we support our allies that are on our team, right? Israel is our ally against Iran. Iran is currently funding our adversaries in Russia and sending these same weapons that were used over the weekend. Those are being used in Ukraine right now. So this is a great opportunity for Republicans to show real leadership as people are questioning whether or not the Biden administration is cut out for this, to show up for our allies and say, we will stand for freedom, we will stand for liberal democracy across the world, we'll stand with our friends against our enemies, and tell the American people that that's what they're supporting going into 2024 elections.
Well, these are the conversations that are taking place on the Hill right now. We'll see what happens from a political development coming up the next couple of days or even hours. Well, let's switch gears right now to New York, Manhattan court. The Donald Trump jury selection gets underway this morning. Chris, I'll start with you on this one, and then we'll come back to Rich. What do you expect, Chris, as far as any potential impact on the campaign? And I know that we've seen that this is essentially strengthened in many ways Donald Trump's support amongst his core base. But when you have a former president and a campaigning candidate in court during the day, campaigning at night, what message does that send, and what do you think is going to play out?
Well, I think we understand at this point that President Trump does not play by the same political laws of physics that regular politicians do. I think that a lot of this is kind of baked in, and ultimately, this should be, for any other politician, a really big issue. I don't want to get into the lewd details of what he's accused of here, but that kind of stuff is usually what would be used for the Biden campaign to talk about the issues that President Trump is facing. They would want to make this the main issue. The problem is it just doesn't work, right? People understand who President Trump is. They understand the baggage that's built in. And honestly, this might be better for both campaigns in the sense that if that's the case where voters aren't hanging this around President Trump's neck, they can talk about policy, they can talk about the issues, they can talk about stuff that people are actually worried about at home. Hardworking Americans are worried about the economy, inflation. We just got inflation numbers last week showing higher than expected inflation. That's the stuff that people want to be talking about and focus on. These trials are ultimately going to be something that are much less important politically, unless something really huge bombshell comes out, which I don't see happening anytime soon.
Maybe less important politically, but it's still happening, and the eyeballs are still going to be there. The attention's still going to be there. So, Rich, do you see any fallout from this? Or like Chris says, is it just that this process plays out and you focus your campaigning on different issues?
Well, you know, what's interesting is that today and over the next week is the most important part of the trial, jury selection, because those 12 people could essentially determine the election. At this state, you know, Trump's MAGA base is never going anywhere. It's the 8 to 10% of the other voters out there who are going to have to make a decision as to whether or not, if Trump is convicted, they want to support a convicted felon to be the president of the United States. You know, you could call Trump Mr. Counterintuitive, meaning that things that typically happen to people in his situation don't happen to him. Typically, you know, anybody running for president who's a criminal defendant is nullified immediately just by virtue of the fact of having the status of a criminal defendant. But this guy this guy could benefit from a conviction. So it's really tough to predict because it is counterintuitive. And if you look at the history, 4 criminal indictments, 91 counts, his polls went up. Who's to say that he doesn't benefit from a conviction?
It's a lot to get through today, but I always enjoy the conversation, guys. Thanks, as always, for joining us. We'll see you again soon for Monday Morning Quarterback. Chris Johnson and Rich Nichols joining us as our guests today. Thanks very much.